type in Sonoma County is chaparral, or shrubland. It covers many of the hillsides where it is too dry for trees to grow. This video discusses the adaptations of the chaparral or shrubland to fire and measures that can be used to manage chaparral. We will hear from several research scientists and fire experts on this unique type of vegetation.
Chaparral is a very oily, high fuel load type of vegetation, a brush that's adapted to Mediterranean climates. When fires get started in chaparral, they will burn very intensely because of those volatile oils and the fuel load. Not uncommon to have 30-foot flame lengths, and it will burn very rapidly, especially if the topography and the wind are moving it towards a thicker stand of chaparral.
The thing that distinguishes chaparral from other woody vegetation, in particular from forests, is historically fires have always burned in what we call crown fires, and that is high-intensity fires that kill all of the above-ground vegetation, which is quite unlike the pattern that we see in many of our conifer forests, for example. Historically, they burned with low-intensity surface fires. So chaparral has evolved under high-intensity crown fire regime, and they are resilient to very long periods without fire. They can go easily 100 years without a fire, and they'll recover just fine. There's two main modes that are seen in chaparral shrubs. One is to resprout from the base, and other species will recover from seedlings, and those seeds arise from a dormant seed bank. These species typically will produce seeds every year, and those seeds go into the soil and they're dormant and they don't germinate until they're stimulated by fire. If you look at the estimates that have been given on what the natural fire regime in chaparral was, it's generally put at the range from 30 to 130 years. They're very tolerant to long intervals between fire, very intolerant to short intervals. There's two ways to look at the chaparral issue on your landscape. Number one is, as the chaparral gets older, the fire hazard is likely to be greater. By that, I mean the intensity of the fire once it ignites is likely to be higher. Fires are likely to spread rapidly in that older vegetation. When you replace the chaparral with grasses, you greatly increase the length of the fire season. For example, mature chaparral has a fire season of maybe 4 or 5 months out of the year where it's highly flammable and can carry fire. Type convert to grasslands, and you likely are going to increase the frequency of fires. But once they occur, they potentially will be less hazardous. In Northern California, there is a bigger problem with invasive shrubs, in particular the brooms, for example, Scotch broom and French broom. I've done work up in the Marin area, and there it's a big problem. It comes in after the fire produces, and it comes from a landscape that is adapted to frequent fires. The southern part of the Mediterranean basin is where many of these shrubs come from.
There's 4 snapshots in time for the vegetation. This is 1932, and you still see a lot of chaparral in this. Some of this area had recently burned. So we're looking at now about 90 years ago, quite a bit of chaparral. 60 years ahead to 1993. And this is 29 years after a large fire. You'll see that the amount of chaparral has decreased quite a bit since the earlier slide that was closer to a fire. Now coming forward to 2013, which is the most recent vegetation map. And you can see the chaparral has really decreased, and the conifer forest has spread out quite a bit, and there's still a lot of the hardwood. But the proportion of chaparral to woodland has decreased quite a bit. Chaparral has been declining over the last 50 years, and it did up till 2017. And there's a new vegetation map being made right now, the wide amount of chaparral in 1932. It looks a lot more like this today than it did 10 years ago. So the chaparral came back strongly in the areas that burned. And that's part of a big cycle that seems to be happening in this area.
For conifer forests, all management here in California, looking at removing invasives and creating defensible space around a property if needed, and also looking specifically for ecological and cultural objectives on the property, creates a really wide opportunity and many different management practices that a landowner can use to manage their property. Chaparral habitat is a challenge here in California. Not only is it highly flammable and burns really well under the right conditions, but it spots well, so it creates fire ahead of itself pretty regularly. I think the first thing to do is to speak with an ecologist, look at mechanical thinning. Applying fire in chaparral can be beneficial, especially when managing it around open space such as meadows or wet grasslands, but that's a difficult one to manage.
Chaparral is one of the most fire-prone types of vegetation. It's difficult to reduce the fuel loads in this type of vegetation, so we have to learn to live with these areas to be safe. We'd like to acknowledge the agencies that provided the funding for these videos, the California Department of Food and Agriculture and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. If you would like to learn more on these subjects, please visit our website.